Sarah, thank you for coming by today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I love jumping on the other side.
Of course, yeah, it must be a bit of a interesting experience because I know you do get interviewed a lot, but you're interviewing a lot of people lately yourself. So
it's kind of fun to do both sides.
yeah. Do you find it's a different skill?
Absolutely, yeah. I thought because I'd been on podcasts before, when I started one, I was like, oh, it's going to be exactly the same thing. But I'd never realised, and I'd actually never truly appreciated that the interviewer each time is looking at the time, looking at the audio, making sure it's recording, looking at the levels, trying to think of the next question, but listening to your answer and trying to make it relevant. And yeah, the first time I did it, I was like, as an interviewee, all you have to do is just answer the question.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like I guess because I feel like I'm kind of like better at listening than talking sometimes, I find it easier to interview people, but then I see like it just screws with your brain. It's like you feel like it should be the same, but it's actually completely different.
It's so different. And it took me ages to warm into it because I would just get so stressed about like coordinating how long each question was taking and like if I was going over time and, you know, if you've got sections and you want to get through them all, you kind of don't want to interrupt them, but you want to let them talk and also not miss stuff. And yeah, there's just so many umbrella thoughts that you're having over the top of it.
Yes.
Whereas when you're answering, that's all up to the other person. You're just like, I'm just going to keep rambling and you tell me what to do.
That's it.
Yeah. So I kind of, I love both. I love being able to do both.
Yeah, it's good. And I thought an interesting place to start would be because one thing I've heard you asked a lot is that people always ask what you do, but they don't ask who you are. So I want to get a bit of a sense of who you are, Sarah. So maybe you could tell us a bit of your background story, what you were doing before Matcha Maiden, Matcha Mylkbar and all that.
Great question. So I started out, very, very beginning. I was born in South Korea, adopted when I was 6 months old, brought up by a white Caucasian country bumpkin family, so have always had a very unique cultural identity, looking fully Asian. This is a podcast, but we're videoing, so fully Asian, but a very like white Caucasian kind of Anglo-Saxon surname. And I think that's always encouraged us to have a very open-minded view of the world because we were exposed to different cultures very early, and also to accept what's different about you and love it because you kind of have no choice when you look really different to your parents. Like you always, as a child, you're going to get lots of questions. And our parents were absolutely amazing. They were so encouraging of us trying everything. So we did every sport. I did dancing. I was a ballerina. Like everything that we wanted to explore about our talents or discovering our not so much talents. We had a childhood that was absolutely full of just experimenting and exploring, and I think that set us up really well for carrying that into adulthood. So I went to a Catholic primary school, which was really small, like 60 kids, and then my first high school was very similar. It was about 80 or 100 kids, I think, from year 6 to year 12, so it was a really small school.
That is small.
Yeah, and then I moved to an academic entry, much bigger school for year 12, and I was a ballerina when I was younger. Then I had a really rebellious phase when I first sort of quit that when I had to choose between school or going full time. And then I realised boys and parties and eating and not training all the time. I had a really kind of total opposite non-discipline phase. And then by the time year 12 came around, I kind of got it together at the right time. Thank goodness. I always think of the sliding doors moments in my life. And ended up with quite a good score and no idea what to do with it. I hadn't really...
Quite a good meaning ducks, yeah?
meaning ducks, which I trust me was the biggest surprise to not just me but the entire school. Any teacher who had ever come across me, my parents, everyone was just like, what? I had been so naughty beforehand. But I guess I just got it together on time for that year. And I decided, my parents again were really, really good at guiding us and saying, you know, the start of year 12 is a clean slate. It doesn't matter what you've been, what kind of a student you've been. You've got 10 or 11 months to just give it your future the best chance that you can. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I just thought I'll just do the best I can, and whatever happens, I'll reverse engineer from that. And they had continued to encourage us to do extracurricular stuff, and so I kept that kind of broad range of interests all the way through. And then I ended up in law because I got a really good score and then thought, what's going to open the most doors? Medicine's really narrow. Any kind of science, medicine or medical or sciencey based degree was going to kind of closed more options than it opened. And I thought law, I could do politics or diplomacy or anything really. And that just kind of carried on for pretty much my whole career there. I had a really good time at uni. Didn't necessarily think I have to be a lawyer, but I was like, uses great parts of the brain, opens lots of doors. I ended up getting to the end of my law degree and again, not really knowing what I wanted to do. So I thought, I'll go to a law firm, get qualified, and then at least I've started something.
Yep.
I always think that even if you don't know what you want to do, it's better to do something than nothing. It always takes you one step further to something, whoever knows what that is.
That's right. Sometimes it is a process of elimination.
Totally. And sometimes it's a process of just biding your time. Like, I think there's something to be said for the fact that even if you don't know where you are, there are some things that require maturity or life experience. And if I tried to start anything that I have now straight out of uni, I didn't know anything about the world. So even if I didn't love every minute of my 3 or 4 years in law, it taught me everything I needed to know about who I am and what I like. And you don't know who you are until you get out there into the workforce and meet people and try stuff. So I spent kind of 3 or 4 years figuring out who I was and realizing what the workforce looks like and how many more jobs and positions there are than you ever understand at school or at uni. You're just sort of like, wow, you hear about all these people who have branched off into stuff that you're like, oh, that's a possibility.
Yeah, it's not just lawyer, it's a million different types of things you can do.
And not even lawyer, like you can move into, I had friends go to the UN and do humanitarian work, and then other people went in-house and went into banks, or a friend went into a fashion label in New York and it started through law, but it went into management consulting. Like, there was just so many options, and I think I never expected the one I would end up taking, but I definitely had in my mind that whole time that there was a lot more out there than you could ever imagine.
Interesting. But it sounds like, I guess, you were glad that you had that experience or that kind of base. I've heard a few people say that, where it's like they go through uni, get a job in this career, and even though it might not be what they end up as down the line, it sort of creates this good foundation which you can then build on different areas. Sounds like that was the case for you.
Yeah, totally. And I think no matter what that base is, you can't speed up the decision. Like, if you don't know what you want to do, you're not going to wake up the next day just because you want to know what you want to do. You just have to kind of put one foot in front of the other, do something. The more you're doing, the more you'll figure out by elimination what you like and what you don't like. But if you just sit there in a vacuum trying to decide that, you won't make any progress. Yeah,
I think that's a mistake a lot of people do make, waiting for inspiration to hit instead of just experimenting, testing things, and then figuring out your way as you go along, which I totally get.
Yeah, and you have bills. Like, you have to kind of, have the monies to do the stuff.
That's very true.
So even if I always remind myself, and I had a really good friend remind me about my second year of law, that it wasn't until this generation, or maybe the generation before us, that we believe that you have to love your work. Like, people just worked. There was no question that, are you fulfilled and passionate? Like, it's great that we have that luxury now, but for most of history, work is work, and then play is play.
Yeah.
You just work to pay the bills and to provide for your family and to eat and to do all those things, and then the rest is separate. Whereas we've kind of merged this idea that, if I don't like my job, like, I shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you gotta feed yourself. And
yeah, sometimes you have to. And it does sound like you've done a good job of combining those things for yourself now, but I'm curious, what was being a lawyer like? I mean, did you enjoy what you were doing at the time, or how was your kind of experience of that at the time?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people assume that I really hated it because I did move on from it. And a lot of people do actually have that experience in the job that they leave, but I wasn't like that. I wasn't even actively looking for anything else. It was more of this is a good job. I'm really grateful that I'm learning. There's lots of directions you can go in. It's a really respectable place to be. But maybe one day I'll do something else. Like, it was such a distant prospect that I would do anything else. So at the time, I actually quite enjoyed it. It was challenging enough. I got to work overseas for 8 months and have an incredible expat experience in Hong Kong. And it was only sort of by accident that we discovered Matcha, because I had been in Africa and got a parasite and came home and couldn't drink coffee, and it was like this whole health unraveling, and instead of coffee, we discovered matcha. And it was only through the contrast of seeing that since I was a child, that creative side had been equally as dominant as the nerdy side. And I don't think I even realised that creative side had been slowly stifled by law. But I wasn't unhappy because the other side is still a part of me. It's just only half.
Got it.
And once I started to reactivate that part of my brain, and the business was a side hustle, and I could compare kind of what my body and brain and feelings were doing one work, and then going back to the day job during the day and saying, oh, maybe this is good, but not great.
I guess, yeah, I'm curious about that transition of where you started to discover that, because I believe you're in Rwanda and that's where you got that virus or that health issue started. So, yeah, maybe if you could just take us through the story of, I guess, that you briefly said it then, but maybe if you could just expand upon where this idea came from, Matcha Maiden, and how that sort of started to come into fruition. Yeah,
so I had taken, I think maybe this was a bit of a sign early on that my mind was wandering. In my very first year, I think I was 8 months in, I took a month of leave, and I hadn't even accumulated that much leave, so I had to buy the leave, and it's just not the done thing. But we had this incredible opportunity to go to Rwanda with YGAP, because my now husband was, he's got a creative agency, and he had done all the creative and digital for their 5 cent campaign. And this school in Rwanda that we got to go and spend a month in was one of the schools that had been the beneficiary of the funds from that campaign. So as a sponsor, he was invited, and I was able to go, and I spoke French, and the language had just changed from French to English. So we had all gone with particular skills and spent a month there. And it was an absolutely transformative, incredible experience. I didn't even actually know about the parasite until I got back home. So over there was incredible. I came home. I went straight back to work sort of a day after I got back. Didn't take any buffer time. I was really out of touch with like wellness and resting. And the parasite had kind of wreaked havoc on my gut, so I wasn't digesting food properly. It wasn't so obvious. It was more like a slow burn of just losing weight because I wasn't hungry. And then it got to the point where I'd lost 15 kilos, so it was tiny, and still trying to go to work and do these long hours and just working on weekends and pushing myself, and I ended up just collapsing at work.
Wow.
Literally hadn't realized anything was happening until I was like, why am I on the floor? Like, why? I feel fine. And I think that's where I learned the difference between adrenaline and actual energy. Like I was running on adrenaline, but I was like, I feel good, let's go. And through that process of having to take a good 2 months off work, like I was kind of in and out, I had to learn about nutrition and how to fuel your body and how to rest and all these things that you take for granted because when you're younger, you can just thrash yourself about and you're fine. Yep. I had to learn all that, and in that transition, realised coffee was just way too harsh, not necessarily for everybody, but when your immune system is already compromised and you're underweight and you're kind of on the point of anxiety because your body's so compromised, I couldn't drink it anymore. And it was only after getting sent to Hong Kong, just after that, on a deal when I went back to work, that I discovered in Asia, matcha's been around for centuries. And Zen Buddhist monks have been using it to keep them awake during their sort of multi-hour meditations, but not to have the like spike and then crash of coffee, but to have a sustained energy boost that's really gentle on your body. Yep. So I was sort of like, oh my God, there's caffeine that's healthy for you? What do you mean? And I got hooked over there, and then Nick came over and he got hooked, and the idea really came about because we couldn't find it when we got back to Australia. So it was one of those typical selfish need to close a gap in the market. Went online, couldn't find anything that wasn't kind of bulk 10 kilogram lots. Ended up buying it. It arrived. We're like, that's too much powder. What are we going to do with it? And we just decided to start selling it. So it started as purely a side hustle, not even a hustle, like it was literally a hobby. That we were like, oh, let's, do a project together and have an excuse to work on something as a couple and spend a bit more time together.
Be able to call yourself an entrepreneur.
Literally, I was like, I'll put it on my LinkedIn, I'll sell one bag. Like, that's enough, that's fine. And I kind of actually, looking back, now take that, it was a joke at the time, but now I take that mentality really seriously, that when you start something new, you only need to think about that first bag or whatever the equivalent of that is. If you think about building your empire, it's good to dream big, but you need to plan small because you get too overwhelmed. And if I'd thought about the business now, I wouldn't have started because I would have been like, well, it's impossible. Like, you have to it's all a mind game, and you have to really curtail your thinking so you're not scared. And so whatever makes it less scary, think that way.
Yeah.
And for us, it was like, we need to sell one bag.
Yep.
And it was all Google, led us to eBay, led us to Alibaba, led us to Officeworks. Everything was very DIY. We were like packing by ourselves.
Love it.
I always say, and you've probably heard it before, that we're like Breaking Bad but green, because it was just powder everywhere, and we were like little drug dealers, like packing on little scales, and very, very glamorous beginnings.
Love it. So how did you actually get your first sale? Was it like friends and family that were supporting you, or I guess when was the first sale you had that it was just someone?
A stranger.
Random?
Yeah. So that was a very surreal moment when you're like, what?
Yeah.
You have no reason. You have no incentive to buy this. And it was, I think, quite early on, because we had launched our social media page, and back in 2014 and 15 this was, there was an algorithm, but it was a lot more liberal. Like you could literally do the formula of regular, consistent posting at good times, and you would get the audience organically growing. So we used that for 3 or 4 weeks, I think, continuously before we went on sale, and were able to build an audience that knew that we were doing something health, powdered and superfood, because of the stuff that we had been posting until then. And then by the time we launched, there was already kind of an audience to launch to. So it came, I think in the first week.
Yep.
We sold out
That's awesome.
in kind of 7 or 8 days.
Wow.
And it just shows what a different landscape it was then, the fact that you could literally launch from zero to selling out, because there was there wasn't paid advertising then. Everything was really organic, and it was a different landscape, but that definitely worked in our favour.
How much do you think timing is a factor in business? Because I've interviewed quite a few people where it's not necessarily Instagram, but something they did, whether it's the product or the way they marketed it, they just had very good timing, and that contributed a lot to the initial momentum. And then obviously you have to build that from there. But have you ever thought about that? How much timing plays a role?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I think sometimes people are a little too self-deprecating, and they put everything down to timing.
Yeah.
So I think you have to have the right ingredients, otherwise everyone at that time would have done well.
Yes.
But at the same time, if we had launched even a year later, we might have still done really well, but we happened to launch at a time when no one else was really doing if they were selling matcha, they weren't pitching it in that kind of modern health food way. It was a very traditional Japanese ceremonial, special occasion kind of format, which didn't suit the mass market. It didn't suit the 25 to 35 who were buying online and looking to enhance their well-being. So we definitely had a head start in, I think we had maybe 8 or 10 months before another competitor entered the market at all. And that definitely gave us a really good stronghold on the market. It allowed us to collaborate with brands like Nike and Victoria's Secret, and brands that once they've locked in a matcha brand, they kind of don't need to go to another one ever. So that allowed, another 2 or 3 years of exclusive deals with stockists and distributors, and by the time the next person was pitching, they were like, we've already got a really well performing product, like we don't need anyone else, because it's not like kind of salt or milk where you really shop around. Most people, they find their powder and they're kind of set for life. I think,
and it's, I guess, a testament to the brand that you build as well.
Thank you. But I think that is another reason why timing was so important, is separate to the product. A lot of people's first introduction to matcha as a product was through us.
Interesting.
So the brand trust, because of the education piece in the beginning, they always associate matcha with us, even if we didn't invent it. It was that timing that allowed us so many benefits that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And I don't think we wouldn't have worked at all, but I think timing played a very, very big role. Yeah,
and it's a good point. Like you shouldn't use that as an excuse. If you fail at something, you can't just blame it on timing, but it can be a very helpful thing. But I'm sure, regardless of timing, I'm sure you would have made it work. It just might have been through a different way. So
or just maybe a harder, like a slower burn, or we would have maybe had to be a bit more strategic. Like in our first 8 to 10 months, because there was really no one else, you didn't have to really be that clever. You just had to focus on education and making it easy for them to buy. There was no, if they wanted matcha, there was no other way. So they kind of, you didn't have to have that, you were convincing people why matcha's good, not why Matcha Maiden's matcha is good. And then the dialogue changed a year later to why is our matcha different to everyone else's matcha now that you already know what it is. And that was a very different way to market. Everything had to change from just what is it to why is ours good.
Got it.
And we didn't even know how to do that because we just never had to do it before. So it was a very subtle tweak, but I'm so grateful that we had that head start. It made a big difference.
Awesome. So when did you, I guess, know that you could, when did you decide that this was a thing and that you could go all in on it and sort of remove yourself from law? Like what was that kind of transition point like for you? I stayed full-time for 6 months, and I think, again, it comes back to what made the jump the least scary for me. And part of that is kind of hedging your bets and letting the business prove itself a little bit before I actually made the jump. But part of it was also, unless I jumped, it was never going to get bigger. So I really waited until they were totally mutually exclusive. I probably could have jumped a little bit earlier, but I was trained at that time to identify risk and to be really risk averse. And it took a long time for my brain to switch to a different kind of thinking. And thankfully, Nick is the opposite. He's always had his own businesses. He's never really worked in a structured, risk-averse environment. So he was on the other side, sort of like, if you don't jump, it will never get bigger. Like, you're actually hindering it by staying. So I waited until we got our biggest order ever came in from Urban Outfitters in the States, and they had found us off the power of our digital presence through social media and online. That's amazing.
I actually thought it was spam, so I ignored it for 3 weeks because I was like, whatever. Like, we're at Melbourne Couple in our garage. That's not a thing. But they ended up forgiving us and ordering more than we'd sold the whole time. And because we were packing it ourselves, the only way to say yes was for me to leave and pack it, because Nick already had his portfolio in his agency was like maxed out. He was already running most of it on the side. There was nowhere else to go except another employee.
Wow.
And that was what made the decision easier, because it was all or nothing. It was like, it will fail if we say no. Not it will fail, but if we say no, we're agreeing to leave it this small. Yeah,
you're the bottleneck. It's like that point where you're not burning the ships and going all in hoping it works. It's like, it's working, but it's not going to get any bigger unless...
Yeah, like I'm stopping it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I was like, my law degree, I kind of ask myself when I'm at these crossroad moments of my life, what is the once in a lifetime decision? And law is, even though, you know, if I ever came back to it, I'd be behind my peers. Like there was some cost. Really, there wasn't that much of a cost, because it's a very stable industry. Lawyers are never going to not be needed.
It's very true. I
had enough time to establish a good reputation and make good relationships. So the risk, even though it was a big risk, it wasn't really. Yeah. I minimized it as much as I could. And in the end, once it came to, well, I could, you know, stick with law that I'll always have, or I could leave and just give this a chance. Doesn't work, I go back. I've lost, 6 months? Yeah. It wasn't actually a hard decision.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's spoken like a true risk management lawyer. So it's
but if you'd known me as a lawyer before this whole thing, you'd be like, how did you change your thinking? Like, I was like, no, look at all the risks and like I'd be modelling out the future. And I have learnt to rip the Band-Aid and then reap the benefits, because that whole idea of timing, it's like, if you wait any longer, you know, I would wait until things were perfect, and in waiting, I would almost never start, because nothing's ever perfect. And Nick really taught me that done is better than perfect. It's better to just get it out and test it and then change it.
Yep.
Like, products change all the time.
Yep.
You don't know what's perfect until you test it against your audience. Like, what if you think you wait 12 months for this perfect material, you send it out and your customers are like, I hate this.
Yeah.
You've got to change it anyway. So he was just like, let's just get out. Like, now I look at the bags, I'm like, they are so ugly. But just get it out. Yep. And they lasted. People loved it. They loved the packaging. And I was like, oh.
There you go.
It was perfect. Like, you know.
I get it.
Just got to take the jump, and obviously I think one of the big things that I remind people now is don't just jump and leave your job because you found something you're passionate about, because I did need money for capital to buy stock. We did need another 6 months of wages. So you can wait a little while before you make a jump. But then once you realise if you've got a good thing going, don't be the biggest obstacle to it either.
Cool. That's good advice. So what was that transition like when you first went from, your law job to running the business? Because one of the challenges I see is sometimes from like friends and family, they can see what you're doing and be like, why are you leaving this like law job in Hong Kong? You're doing really well. Got your whole career ahead of you, and now you're packing matcha in your garage. So what was that like? Was that challenging?
It was. Fortunately, our family and friends were incredibly supportive, and I think because Nick has always had businesses, it wasn't as foreign to our network as it might have been if he was a lawyer and we were both corporate. So we had a lot of support. We also had a lot of friends who were already running their own businesses, so we kind of had a cheer squad that had been there and knew it wasn't like the end of the world. You're probably going to survive. It's not nearly as bad as you think.
Yep.
And I think also this is mass stereotype and generalisation, but because I didn't have Asian parents that weren't doctor, lawyer, they weren't wedded to the fact of me being a lawyer for the sake of it. They were very proud and happy, but they also they knew that I was twirling around and drawing and being really artistic since I was a child, and that I hadn't had that kind of sparkle since I had been doing that creative work on the side, and in law I'd lost it because there was no room or spare time. And my mum in particular, I think she said, I'm just happy to see you as excited as you are about this, and to see that side of you that's really people focused and ideas and innovation focused, drawing and creating and designing again. And if you can make a living out of it, it's a part of you that would be a shame to lose because it's more dominant than my nerdy side.
It's amazing.
So that transition wasn't hard. The hardest thing was the structure. I had gone from an environment where your working hours, even if they're long, are clear.
Yep.
It's kind of clear when you get there and when you go home. Your lunch break is about the same as everyone else. Your weekends, you sometimes work on a weekend, but it's at least distinguished from a weekday. You're not meant to be at the office at the same time. And going from that and having a clear hierarchy to no mentor, no boss, no experience, no working days, no anything, I thought it would be so much fun, but it actually was a mess.
Yeah, I totally get it.
Like, you're just sort of like, I woke up the first day and I was really excited, but I also was like, what do I do?
Yep.
Like, where do I start? How do I decide? Like, how is Monday different to Tuesday? Like, and it took me a year, I reckon.
I believe it. It becomes very blurry.
So blurry.
It's like, well, am I working today? Kind of. And I'm not working today, but I'm kind of working. It's hard.
Yeah, and like, you either go one way or the other. You don't work enough, or you're not efficient with your time, so you just work all day, but you're kind of fluffing.
Yes.
Or you just work all the time.
Yes.
And you don't distinguish between any day or the other because there's such a long to-do list, and your work, you can see the results of your work in the results of your business. Whereas when you're working in a company, like, you can't actually often see the direct result of your labor.
Yeah.
So if I would work like a super long day, my pay wouldn't change.
Yes.
Or even my bonuses usually wouldn't change unless I went up to 200% of my billable hours. But here I could see, well, if I work this long, this much sales happens. So like, why would I stop ever?
Yeah,
and
I get it.
Nick and I got to the point where we were just housemates working together.
Wow.
And exhausted ones at that. And we're like, what has happened to us? Like, we've just got no boundaries. And I was like burning myself out again. And I'd left corporate partly because of the lifestyle, and then I'd made my lifestyle worse than when I was corporate.
Wow. So how did you fix that?
A lot of reinstating the boundaries I'd walked away from, really. Like,
interesting.
Like making artificial ones for myself.
Yep.
And appreciating that it's not that your lifestyle isn't liberated and you're not freer because you have no boundaries. You're actually freer when you have boundaries.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the same extent as corporate, but definitely like tail ending the week. Like, Monday to Friday is a working week. These are your working hours. You'll bend those rules every now and then, but to have them as a default just kind of keeps you're not meant to just work all the time.
Yeah.
And that comes back to the whole, you're not what you do, you're who you are. And I didn't have a who I am when I was a lawyer because there was just blur.
Yeah.
And the first year of business, I didn't have a who I am either.
Yeah.
And it was suddenly when I was like, well, what's the point in leaving corporate and having a business if I have no family life, no friends? Like, we had so many friends, but we'd always like, they're all working in business, so we'd have business catch up. You know what I mean? Like, nothing was chill.
Yeah.
And it took another year, maybe another 18 months to learned to use my calendar to kind of colour in the bits that were working hours and shade out the times where it was like stop working if you can, or at least aim to finish then. I quarantined Sundays really religiously. I started to, schedule meetings better so that my people-facing things were all on one day, but then the next day would be a day where I could actually do computer work in a row and get our BAS done. Nothing was as chaotic. You can kind of bring back some order and and it's changed everything. That's
good. Because, it's a real challenge and something I've been experiencing, going through a bit of a transition myself into doing my own thing. And, everything becomes so blurry, and just being able to create those artificial boundaries is so key, because otherwise you do end up, everything just blurs into one and you don't even know what's going on or what day it is.
And you get to the end of the year and you've done a lot of good things and you've worked really hard, but you're like, what do I have to show for it? Like, I don't even know. You have no milestones or goalposts. There's no reviews. Like, you have no boss kind of saying every quarter. You're not celebrating and stopping. You're just literally, everything is just a blur, and you're sort of like, that's not a life. Like, I moved into this to create a more free. Well, I felt like quite constrained in corporate, so I'm doing this for a bit of the freedom, and I'm not benefiting from it. What's the point? I might as well go back to a stable income where I can check out when I leave the office.
It's almost, if you don't get on top of it, it's almost more freeing to be in that
yeah. And I found myself wanting to go back, not because of the subject matter, but because of the ability to switch off. And I was like, that's a problem. If that's what I'm missing, it's not the money, it's not the anything, it's literally the ability to turn off. And like, I'm doing something wrong.
Well, it's good that you managed to mostly get on top of it now.
Mostly.
It'll never be perfect.
It's a work in progress.
It always will be, I think.
I'm definitely still getting there, but I think that's part of the roller coaster.
That's it. So where are most of your sales now? Because I believe you've got a warehouse in Greece and the US, is it?
Yeah.
So where are most of your sales? Are they actually outside of Australia now?
Most of them are still in Australia. That's our biggest market. The US is probably a quarter, and so I reckon 60% would be Australia, 25% would be America, and then the other 15 would be split between our Greek distributor. They're sort of licensed to run Matcha Maiden in Greece, which was such a random thing that just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, it does seem random.
But an amazing family business who are ex-Coca-Cola, and they wanted to start their own wellness distribution and move away from kind of corporate as well. And they took on, I think, 10 or 12 international brands that were doing things in wellness, and they've done really well. And they kind of are a gateway into the EU. And then, the rest of that 15% is just made up of everywhere. We've got random stockists in like Budapest and
it's cool.
Just all over the place.
There's a lot of that come through, same with like Urban Outfitters just randomly contacting you.
And to the point where we haven't actually distinguished between marketing and sales, to our detriment, at all, really. We've just marketed and then the sales have come, and it's starting to get to that stage where we actually have to separate those functions, and we have to market and have an outbound sales person, because they're obviously different. But for ages, we marketed and the sales would come because there was not really anyone else, because everyone wanted some but they couldn't find any that was reliable, or that they knew if other people were trusting it, it wasn't just some random green powder from who knows where. And because we put our faces to it, they were like, well, there are people who are guaranteeing that it's not just some internet company. And most of our big distributors and stockists have come to us. And then I think in the last, now that it's a highly saturated market, quite suddenly, we've started to focus more on actually selling as a proactive thing rather than a reactive thing. But again, I think that's probably the biggest part of our journey, has stopping being reactive and trying to be proactive. But because you're just on this conveyor belt of like, what have I started? You're just reacting to like all the different things that are happening and the things that need to happen to just keep, your baseline, let alone growing. It becomes like a very hard thing to keep on top of.
I get it. So are you the salesperson at the moment, or have you got someone else?
I'm terrible at sales. I really love marketing. I'm great at it. And it's only new to me that they're separate. I hate selling. Like, even if I truly believe in something, I can market it, but I can't sell to someone. Like, I can't close a deal to save my life. I'm too self-deprecating. I'm very like, no pressure. Like I would never lock anyone into anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a big learning as well, is learning that the bits that you're not good at, they're the bits you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
There's some parts where you need to upskill and obviously like step into a role, but there's some bits where you're like, just get someone else to do it. If they're great at it and you're not, like, you know, don't cause yourself the angst. It actually makes me die inside. So my mum's wholesale. She's the COO. She's and head of wholesale, and she does all the wholesale sales.
That's awesome.
Which is amazing. Nick does all our distributors because he's also amazing at sales. And then in terms of just general overall sales management, we don't have a manager at the moment, and that's probably the next hire. It's been so far highly outsourced and mostly a family business for the internal staff, which I love and which was part of the goal. But now it's sort of like, in this next chapter, that's probably the first role that we would need.
Love it. It's cool.
If anyone out there is in the market for a sales position.
Yep, but they'll definitely hit you up. But yeah, it's a cool business, and sort of leads into Matcha Mylkbar, which it's funny when I think of the hardest businesses to make work, I think of hairdressers and cafes. So what made you, obviously direct-to-consumer brands, it has its own challenges for sure, but yeah, what made you want to open a physical cafe?
I think once I got on the bandwagon of just spontaneous business starting, I was like, oh, I'm just going to keep doing this. This is awesome. And we were in LA, I think a year into Matcha Maiden, just looking at the big trends emerging in the US, and our now business partner, who has been a long time friend, we did law together, but he went straight into hospitality with his brother, and they've had 12 or 13 venues that have been really successful. They were looking at the food trends. Because we were sort of traveling around the same cafes, we decided to do that whole circuit together. And we noticed plant-based eating and matcha drinking were the two biggest trends. And in trying to unite what they had in common, we discovered the Blue Zones research, which are the five very, very small geographical areas of the world where people live just dramatically longer than anywhere else. And in looking at why they live longer, there's, I think, 12 or maybe 15 key factors that they all share. And the main one is majority plant-based diet. But the Blue Zone with the most 100-year-olds is called Okinawa, and they also drink matcha. So we sort of thought, oh, there's this longevity concept here it's vegan, but it's not sort of animal cruelty, stigmatized, heated debate, bloody pictures on Facebook vegan. It's like, you want to live longer, which is why the beauty industry is so big and why wellness is going so well, is people want to live longer and we all want the planet to live longer. So we sort of thought, even as a pop-up and a really fun thing to do to activate both of our brands and businesses that we were working on, Mark and his brother had a venue, the venue we have now in St Kilda, that had a little bit left on its lease, and they were like, why don't we just try a cafe that's a matcha-based cafe that's fully plant-based and that doesn't mention the word vegan but takes a completely different spin on health and wellness and doesn't announce anything, so you could almost trick people into eating plant-based one day a week and teach them that it doesn't have to taste like cardboard, it can still be nutritious, it can still look beautiful. And we opened 3 weeks later.
Wow.
Pretty much painted the place by ourselves. The boys were in their building, and it just lasted. Like, we did the pop-up phase and it just went really well, and we had the Hemsworths came in, they loved it, and it just again, timing combined with a good idea combined with the market being ready and not much else being out there, it just exploded. And so we thought, well, we'll leave it there now, and it's still there.
That's amazing. Another
one of those sort of, let's just see how it goes. And I think those are the ideas, sometimes the least thought out ones, that you just take an opportunity, because if you had waited, you know, maybe it wouldn't have gone so well 6 months later.
Yep, I love it. Yeah, it's in a good spot as well, down in St Kilda here in Melbourne. So yeah, how long has that been open now? 3.5
years.
Yeah, wow, long time. So.
But I mean, you're absolutely right. Hospitality is one of the stupidly most difficult industries to survive in. It's, I think, like 100 venues close every week or something in Victoria, but 100 open. And as a community, we love eating out. We love new things. So it's not a lack of people going out. It's just we're very discerning now. We're kind of sport for choice, and we like novelty, and it's been hard to adapt to that. Incredibly high rents, very difficult shifts in wages and penalty rates, and in a situation where often on a public holiday our dishwashers make more than we do. Wow. And it's, there are challenges in every industry, but it's, I think, broadly as a whole, very difficult for anyone really to do that well at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, glad to see it's doing well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm losing all my hair, but it's fine.
I get it. I would believe it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're sort of wrapping up here, well, coming towards the end of the interview here, Sarah, but I wanted to ask a few quick sort of rapid fire questions for you.
Of course, my favourite.
So I know you're really into quotes and puns. So if you got a favourite quote or pun that you could share with us?
Yeah. Oh, it's not punny, but my favourite quote is, people will never remember what you said or what you did. They'll always remember how you made them feel. I think it's a good one for business, but also in your personal life, that we just agonise over the particular wording or the particular way things look and all the details, but really people only actually remember how they felt in that moment or in that interaction with you or in that interaction with your product. And once I sort of stopped just wallowing in the detail of everything, of every copy, of every ad that went out, of every like flyer and everything, all that labeling, and just focused on what I want people to feel, everything, your decision making becomes a lot easier. You're building loyalty and trust because they come back to the feeling. You realize that the product is important, but it's really not. It's not most of the picture. It's they come back for the brand, which is that feeling. And same in your personal life. Your personality is your personal brand, and that's what people come back to. They don't come back to like your specific speech that you made one day or your words you said on a podcast. They're like, how did I feel while I listened to that? Yeah. So yeah, I find if we all focused more on that feeling, I think we would get more outcomes that we want.
Yeah, it's so true. It's almost like it gives you that guiding compass. You don't have to necessarily know what the nitty-gritty details are, but you kind of have that North Star, and then you follow that, and
everything else falls
out.
into place. Yeah.
Yeah, love it. And have you got a favourite book or a book that you've read recently that had a big impact on you?
Yeah, so I always say this, and people always find it so weird. Well, first, my overarching favourite book is Harry Potter, like hands down. I love every single book. I spent my whole childhood nose deep in them, and I reread them all the time. But the weird one is I have this quirky interest in war and crime, obviously, but mainly war. And I think it's just so strange because I'm so yay and uplifting and humanity based, and I just find like war history and war zones really interesting. Wow. So there's this book called Emergency Sex, which has got nothing to do with sex. It's just an inflammatory name that obviously draws people's attention. Yep. And it follows the journals of 3 UN workers through all the major war zones of like the recent years. So Somalia, Haiti, Rwanda, Cambodia, Liberia. No. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't remember what the other ones are, but there's like 6 or 7 war zones that they all end up uniting. One's a doctor, one's just a peacekeeping worker, and one is a lawyer. And it just follows, firstly, a lot of these war zones from the ground up rather than the historical recount that you read about, which is top down. It's been banned in the UN bookshops because it's so controversial. Oh, wow. And I'm sure there's a lot of creative license. But also it just looks at the idea that they spend every mission trying to get to safety. They get to safety and then they can't live without adrenaline. So they have to go back, and they spend their whole lives like trying to get back to war zones because they adapt to that crazy feeling of like danger and risk. And the title refers to the fact, which is only one small paragraph in the book, it refers to the fact that often when your life is threatened in these war zones, like people will just grab someone and have sex because they're like, it's an emergency, procreation, it's like a human like primitive need. And I just found it so interesting to read that there are people out there who go and live on the front line, but they can't come back and be normal. But we couldn't also survive without them being that way. And some people just choose to like give their life to those causes. I just think it's so interesting.
That's fascinating.
It's got nothing to do with my normal life, but I think that's why I like it.
Well, it almost sounds like running a business in a way.
Kind of. Yes, like, you know it hurts and you're like, lose hair and lose ears, but you'll do it anyway. You can just keep going back to it. Absolutely.
I love it. I'll put that on the list. And what's coming up next for you, Sarah, this year? What are your main projects?
So many things. I've got a book coming out in August. I think August or September. That's the biggest project that has... I've finished the manuscript. That took I signed the book deal the week of our wedding, didn't kind of get started until a month later. Had to kind of pump out the whole thing in like 14 days.
Wow.
Bit of adrenaline, like we were talking about.
Yep.
I have to go back to the pain. No, it was amazing. And so that comes out in September, October, and August to September, sorry. That will be the biggest thing that happens this year, I think. I never thought I'd write a book, or especially on the Seize the A philosophy, which I really just sort of thought up in my brain and didn't realise there was enough material there to actually turn it into a full book. But it turns out as I started typing, I was like, there's a lot in my brain to get out.
It's always the way.
Yeah, so evolving the podcast and that whole idea into a full brand, I think, is the big thing for this year. And we've got a lot of travel on the cards, a lot of amazing collaborations and partnerships that are continuing, or new ones that are coming out. I think my main goal is to use this year, because we hope to start to think about having a family towards the end of the year, is use this year to just say yes to stuff that doesn't necessarily push you forward, but that's an amazing experience and that's spontaneous and random and exciting. But you can't just uplift a newborn the same way that you can uplift yourself. So we're kind of in a good mind frame of so much is going on out there in the world. The market's ripe for great opportunities and awesome stuff, awesome partnerships and jobs and work and filming and recording and all these kinds of things. So just like do them all.
Love it.
Yeah, no goal in particular, but just like have a good red hot crack and have a great year.
Love it. Sounds like a packed year.
Yeah. I don't know full of what, but something.
That's cool. And is there anything I haven't asked you, or just anything you want to make sure you pass on before we finish up?
Oh gosh, I guess the big thing is just coming back to your first question, even though it is such a fundamental thing to the whole philosophy that you're not what you do. I answered the question still by explaining my whole career path, and it's just a sign that we do, even if you're aware of it, you do come back to defining yourself in a particular way. And I think the most important thing for anyone, whether you're successful or searching, or whether even if you have found what you want to do forever, you just have to find time to be you outside of that. You'll be a better worker, you'll have better ideas, you'll be fresher, you'll be healthier. If you have some kind of pursuit, it can be even just like reading or knitting or gardening or something that allows your brain to have a little rest and allows you to not just work and die. Like, that's not the point. You're meant to be a person and have a life and leave a legacy as well. So just don't forget to cultivate that side of you.
Love it. Great advice. Well, thank you for coming in, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you online?
Everywhere.
What's the best way?
I guess Instagram is probably the one I'm on most, and that links to everywhere else. So Spoonful of Sarah, or Seize the A, or Matcha Maiden, or Matcha Mylkbar. All the inboxes go to me if you want to DM me on any of those, and all my email addresses are on there. And I can't hide really. I've just put it all out there, and now I can't get it back. So any way to contact me.
Well, thanks again, Sarah. It's an amazing journey, cool businesses that you've started, and you're doing amazing things. So thanks for coming and sharing that today.
Oh, thank you so much.